Hi everyone, welcome to my review of Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill Volume 2 in 2004. Here is the double pack, and once again we're here with a Tarantino review, and this time the second part, in the Kill Bill kind of double bill here. Now, this is technically, of course, if you separate, it's the fifth Tarantino film, but yes, Kill Bill to me is a complete piece, but if I had to separate them, yes, we'll talk about them separately, and this review, of course, there'll probably be some spoilers in this review. Actually, some plot points that I'll maybe mention. So yes, be warned. But I guarantee most people that are watching this have probably seen Kill Bill 1 and 2. But yes, basically, here we are. And of course, back in my maybe controversial review of Kill Bill 1, I said it was my favourite Tarantino. I said both of these are really my favourites. I think that together and separately, individually, these two, are the best Tarantino films for me. Yes, even better than Pulp Fiction. And there's actually another film I'll confirm now. That's not the Kill Bill films that I actually also prefer to Pulp Fiction. And yes, that was in my top 50. But this one, Kill Bill 1 and 2, for me are far better than really anything he's done. And yes, many people. Kill Bill films are very, very divisive, and of course, this came out a year later, and it kind of completes the film, the picture overall, and people had, a lot of people had criticisms with Kill Bill 1, saying that it lacks, substance, which I, of course, did not agree with. I think it's one of the best films ever made, and it's not just all style. I mean, yes, it's stylized, very much so, but it has got depth, definitely, actually more so than really his other ones for me, actually, and this one, many people who criticised the first, flocked to this one a bit more and actually said it's more mature and all this kind of stuff. But then there's people that preferred the first one, saying this hasn't got as much action and all this kind of stuff. And it's just, a lot of the time you'd see both of these films down the bottom of the rankings. And for me, this once again it's better than the rest of his films. If I was asked what one I prefer out of the two, I'd say Kill Bill Volume 2. I think this is even better than the first. I think it's better in every way apart from, if you have a single action, you compare the single action set pieces, between the two. This is very, very small scale in the actual action scenes. There's about 4 or 5 different kind of fights, duels, have you, and it's not this. It hasn't got this big set piece like the House of Blue Leaves in the first, and really judging it and kind of comparing it. No, not quite. It doesn't reach the heights in terms of the action the first one reached, but I think in every other way really. And the action that's in this film is absolutely stunning once again, and in every other way really for me. It's better. I think the acting is even better. Thurman, once again, there she is, absolutely wonderful in this film. She gives an even better performance, really, in the scenes that are in this film. She really gives one of the best performances of all time, across these two films. In this one, it opens up to the humanism of it all more. There's more depth to her character, and it's just more of an emotional performance for me. I think as well. Michael Madsen is great. He's hilarious in this film. You've got, of course, Daryl Hannah, who plays Elle Driver, and she is amazing in the film. Of course, completely evil as a character, but she's amazing in the film. And of course, you've got David Carradine as Bill. He actually appears in this film. Properly in the face. He wasn't in the first. And wow, probably one of the best performances of all time as well. These last sort of 45 minutes of the film, probably for me the best acted stuff in Tarantino films, full stop, you could say. And I think as well films like Django and Pulp Fiction as well have some of the greatest performances in them. But I think really the acting is overall the best in the Kill Bill films. And the last 45 minutes of this, which is mostly just dialogue as well. This is a lot more dialogue driven. It has very few action scenes in it, but for me, it just it's better in every way, really, apart from the action. And yes, this film opens up, of course, kind of recapping, but it's basically this film focuses on, of course, Bill himself, her kind of eventually getting to him, and of course his brother Bud, played by Michael Madsen, ticking him off and all this kind of stuff. She's going after these And yeah, just the remaining kind of people to tick off the list. You also, of course, see more of the backstory and how everything went down at the kind of the wedding. Of course, you actually find out it wasn't an actual wedding; it was a rehearsal. And yeah, you see more of that at the beginning. You see complete, the relationships between Bill and Beatrix Kiddo, and also known as the bride. And you see so many things. You see the training with Palme, which is just some of my favourite moments in cinema. I absolutely loved the training sequences. They're funny, they're epic. Such a progression to it, and it just makes the rest of the film, and the way it's kind of juxtaposed with the coffin scene and everything. It just makes it more satisfying. It completes the whole mythology of it all as well. That's the thing for me that he really goes to town on, even more than the first. The first for me has some of the finest exposition in cinema, and this one probably has even better, exposition. The mythology is deepened. You could kind of compare it to The Empire Strikes Back, where kind of you've got the Yoda scenes and all this kind of stuff, and just generally the deepening of the mythology, giving it more depth, more resonance, and then kind of you look back to the events, the first, and kind of see it differently as well, and the whole saga, you could say the whole story overall gets deepened, it gets enriched, and yeah, it just makes it even more complex. And this one really is just, it's so good, this film. And actually in many ways it's just as epic as the first. I think this is much more of a tribute to the Western genre. Most of the tracks are actually Morricone music used. Of course as well. For me, the coffin scene, it's just one of the best sequences in cinema. The way he uses El Arena, the theme for that. Wow. When I first saw Kill Bill 1 back in 2013, I was completely blown away, and I thought there is no way that the second one will top this, especially not in the way that this is, so epic. But for me, it did. I think this is even more epic. The use of music is absolutely stunning. I was blown away. The coffin scene brought me to tears the first time I saw it, and just overwhelmed with kind of just with joy, kind of just the satisfaction of it all, and just how epic and just fantastical it is as well. I think this is the Kill Bill films. They're not completely realistic, but for me, the cinema doesn't. It's not really. I think. Yes, there are great realistic films, but for me, I don't think the cinema always has to be this, and it doesn't mean that it's not believable. Fantasy films, it doesn't mean that, but this, the Kill Bill films, there's moments in it that obviously would not happen in real life, but I think actually that's one of its strengths, because the way, all the different things in this, how it's just so kind of, it's like a superhero film, of course, and it's just so amazing. But then I got so invested, I believed in everything, and it's so amazing, this film. I felt so much emotions. It was more, more tragic actually, this one than the first. It was more human, more uplifting, more warm for me than the stuff that was in here. Especially, of course, you'll know, the final act when she, of course, meets her daughter, BB, for the first time, and I think that is just, it really changes everything. And then when you see the other, the rest of the film again, and you see the first part. It just makes it even better. It's just such a rewarding experience. It's so human, so touching. The ending kind of act of this film, and it just, again, something Tarantino does. This is not just a mindless revenge film. It really, it's a deep film, and I think the way he kind of adds depth and maybe sympathy for the different members of the assassination squad. Maybe not kind of Elle, the character of Elle. She is kind of, I think she's meant to be, completely just unlikable and evil, and in that she succeeds, because she's really one of the most hateable kind of villains in a film, and I think what happens there, of course, is very, very disturbing, in that moment, with her. But I just love, this is kind of more of a thriller, you could say, as well. You've got these tight different scenes that play out throughout the film. You could say subplots, but not really. And it's just so involving, so engaging. But yes, then it kind of ends on such an emotional kind of upbeat, but also just before that very tragic end to the film, and I just think it is wonderful. Cinematography is even better than the first. In its own way. I think the way Tarantino captures landscapes, just in general, the whole cinematography of this film is absolutely some of the finest of all time. It's his best for me. The Kill Bill films are his best cinematography. The editing, wow, and this is kind of a bit more. It's a bit less episodic than the first, you could say. There's kind of a bit of non-linearity, more so than the first, and especially with the actual the coffin scene, and then it flashes back to her training. It's just the perfect use of kind of different jumping back, different flashbacks, to kind of enhance the rest of the film. And the scenes, have such a momentum, even more than the first for me personally. I think the first is a perfect masterpiece. This is even better. It's just beyond it. And I think, as a complete, piece, the Kill Bill films, are definitely in my top 25 of all time. I think, really, of course, he pays tribute to Leone, and I think both are in my top 10 directors. I don't think this is quite as good as say, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, but really, this actually tops any of the other Leone films, and that is saying something for me. And of course, just overall, I think Tarantino just slightly edges out Leone, but I think it's just wonderful how he pays tribute. The use of music in this film is another level. I think it's so epic. It's so perfectly judged. There is not a single piece of music that is not perfectly used in the film, and it's so much fun. This film, it's also even more complex and emotional than the first. I didn't think the first was just a standard straightforward action. I think it had a lot of depth, a lot of kind of the spiritual feel to it. And as well, it tapped into the culture, Japanese culture there, and used that to enhance that. But I think this one even more so has a spiritual feel. It's more of a journey, and it deepens the mythology, while also having a better soundtrack. Maybe not quite as good action as the first. But yes, I think really everything, the acting, the dialogue overall is better than the first. I think the way that Tarantino writes this film, it's just even better. I think he saved, the best stuff until last. I think the final sort of 45 minutes, especially, just some of the very best dialogue in film. Definitely, the Kill Bill films for me have his best overall script. Even better than Pulp Fiction, and I think Pulp Fiction probably has his second best, script. Although I do prefer another film to Pulp Fiction. That's not the Kill Bill films. We'll get to that, but I think maybe Pulp Fiction has a better script than that, and just of course one of the best in film, and this one is as well for me. I think just the subtext, throughout the film, the different, kind of monologues, the stories, involving Bill. It's also amazing, the way that the character of Palme is kind of built up, and then you see him, in the actual flashback, and it just kind of lives up to it more. It's just such a good character that, and the training sequence is so good. Tarantino is he's at his best with this film, and I don't think he'll ever top it. Of course, he's saying he's going to be, only kind of making one or two more films. I'm not sure if I buy that. I'm not sure. He says that, and that's fine. If he wants to, that's fine. But I don't see how, he can just say he's gonna give up. He's gonna kind of move on to other things. But because I just think cinema, especially now, would be a lot worse without him. I think he's one of the guys that's keeping the classic cinema alive, and the use of film as well. And just making so much great films. It's going to be sad if he does, but this film, I don't think he'll ever top. I think the Kill Bill films for me are his best, and I think this is just an epic, beautifully human film. There's one of the best shots. The use of music is almost unmatched, especially of the century. I think the performances are absolutely staggering. Even Thurman, just definitely one of the 30 best performances, of all time across the two films. She goes through so much kind of emotions, that she kind of brings. There's so much that her character goes through, and every sort of emotion that you can be shown is done here. I think across the two films, and the character that she plays, one of the best in cinema. Just an action hero that is only really beaten by a few in cinema really for me. Example one being Indiana Jones. I think she's that good. I think she's one of the best, probably one of the best 5 or 10 action heroes. And yes, I think the performance is so good, and it's such an empowering film, even more so than the first one. I think kind of her character goes through such a struggle, physically, even more so than the first, which is rare, and then emotionally, and then you get that kind of cathartic experience at the end, and then you've got some of my favourite credits of all time. You kind of, it shows all the characters in the first, and just the use of music. It's just so good. Across the whole film, especially the Morricone music, it is just mind blowing. He uses some of the Dollars trilogy music in there and stuff, and it just could not be better. I think the way he uses it is it's just so good. Not much people are as good as Tarantino for me as kind of placing existing music, in their films. A few that are probably better for me are Stanley Kubrick, but really Tarantino is one of the very best at that, and I think he knows exactly what he's doing. And this one got it got kind of almost a similar amount of hate from critics, and I'm not talking people just don't connect with it. I'm talking people bashing on this film, just saying Tarantino can't write, he can't direct, that he doesn't know, he's chucking loads of references and he doesn't know what he's doing. I really disagree with this, and I think the personal attacks that came from him on this film are just uncalled for. I think he's an absolute genius, and I think he knows what he's doing. With pretty much all his films, I think all the films that I've seen, which really just excludes this film here, Death Proof. I've loved all of them, and it's the only one I've not seen. This. We'll talk about that in a minute, but yes, Kill Bill Volume 2, for me, it's less of an action film, and it's kind of, yes, I compare it to kind of Empire Strikes Back, the original trilogy. I'm not saying it's as good as that, it's not as good as that for me, but, I think this film is it deepens the mythology, it's got better acting, the script is even better here, the dialogue, the structure of it is even better. It's more of an epic. The way he kind of tributes Western films, it's just perfect. I think, really, this is Tarantino at his best, and I think the passion and the emotion that went into this film, it's just, even more so than any of his other work for me. I think this is the one where he absolutely, really beat pretty much every film ever made. It's very, very close. It's not far off being top 15 sort of films of all time for me. These films combined, and it is in my top 25. Of course, it gets my highest rating of 100% plus, tier S. There is not a single flaw in this film or the first, but I think this is even better. I think deepens the mythology. There's still some great humour in there as well, but it's just such a kind of a perfect end to this kind of whole story, this narrative. Very simple, you could say revenge films are just, of course, very, very simple. This one isn't, this is a very, very deep, complex, kind of up and down experience where Uma Thurman, the bride, goes through so much, and, the rewarding feel that you get at the end of it, it's so, it's unmatched really in terms of a revenge film. I think it's just absolutely perfect. It's a masterpiece, a magnum opus, of course. And yes, I think it's even better than Kill Bill 1 for me. I think this film, every single second, it's just epic. It's pure. It's just this cinema. It's a celebration of cinema. And for me, if you're talking one per franchise, this film is probably the best. Sorry, the third best. The third best of the 2000s. There's just two more, if you're talking about one per franchise, I think edges this out. Of course, for me, one being Lord of the Rings. I think this film is very close to being the best of the 2000s, and actually the century, is a staggering film. It's perfect in its form, its execution. It's full of heart. It's full of kind of patience in every corner. It's not an immature film for me at all. It's kind of, as it's been described, I think it's one of the best ever made. And in its dialogue, in its action, not as much as the first, but I think it's just mind-blowing action. It's more small scale, more kind of tightly constructed action scenes, but they are absolutely stunning. More disturbing than the first. It has a real atmosphere, and there's certain scenes in this, that are very, very disturbing. One being the eye scene, and as well the coffin scene actually. But then it goes from disturbing, it goes from kind of the bride kind of struggling to her just fighting back, and in that sense, it's so empowering, it's so inspirational, it's epic, and it is one of the best 30 films of all time for me. So yes, thanks for watching my review. Of course, discuss in the comments, maybe what you prefer at the first and this one, and just Tarantino in general. Of course, the next up film to review is Death Proof. Now, this is the only one that I've kind of really not thought I would like really too much. Jackie Brown and The Hateful Eight, I actually still had high hopes for before seeing them. But this film, I think it just doesn't, reading the back and kind of seeing some clips, a couple of clips here and there, seeing some pictures, and actually just kind of thinking about what this is probably going to be like, it doesn't look for me. I think Tarantino himself has actually admitted this is his weakest film, but I think I don't know if it will be bad, this film, but it doesn't look great. I'm just going to say that. Of course, it just does not look great. It's kind of car chases and all this kind of stuff. In this manner, just doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't appeal to me. But I'm going to watch it. I'm going to review it tomorrow. So the review will be up Tuesday, and I think I don't really look forward to it. But then next up, after that, is of course on Tuesday, Inglourious Basterds. Wow, this film is amazing. And then we have Django Unchained on Friday. So all these films, of course, I look forward to doing. And then The Hateful Eight. I'm probably sure it's probably gonna be January. That I review that. The first few days maybe in January. But yes, can't wait to review the rest. And thanks for watching my review of Quentin Tarantino's magnum opus, Kill Bill Volume 2.